Hello and welcome to Through the CSI Lens, Behind the Yellow Tape. I am Christina Brakeman and I will be your host yet again. And this week we are officially on episode 8. Thank you for joining us. We love having you here, and hopefully you're learning some new information about crime scene investigation, forensic science, learning, getting a different perspective on the profession in general, and you're enjoying that. Last episode 7, we talked a little bit about some common myths that you hear on a regular basis, whether it be through TV shows, movies, any type of media. And I selected 7 myths, and we kind of went into detail about those. If you have any other questions or you have any other myths you'd like to talk about, CSI, real life versus television, social media, definitely shoot me an email at throughthecsilens@gmail.com, or can follow us on Instagram at through_the_CSI_lens. And again, that's on Instagram. You will find us there. And I do daily posts on the Instagram page. Some of it is informational, training-wise, discipline-wise. We go into some of the different disciplines in forensic science. Occasionally, I share a local case that made news or that I know of personally, and I'll share information about the case. And occasionally I'll post a few jokes or some memes or something like that. But yeah, check us out on Instagram. I'd love to have you follow us, so make sure you hit follow. So this week we are going to talk about a case that kind of shocked me, actually, because it really did impact me. And I wish I could give you a definitive answer why, other than it involved animals, which I do love animals. I think most of us do to some extent, but it just was really eye-opening as far as hoarding, trying to run and be efficient with a rescue organization, even maybe tapping into a little bit of the mental health issues that I've learned come into play with some of those scenarios. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So this is going to be just a little warning for those of you who are sensitive when it comes to animals. I will be talking in detail about some of the things I saw and some of the things I did. So this may not be the episode for you, but luckily for me, this was the only time I really had a significant animal abuse case, with exception to some other ones that I'll talk about here in a minute. But as far as the totality of the scene, the gravity of the scene, this one was significant. So I like to call this episode where rescue became neglect. That kind of sums it up. So for me, it was just a normal day, obviously going in for my shift, preparing for whatever may come my way, making sure I have my equipment, I'm in uniform, I have plenty of water, a few snacks on hand, because who knows when I'll be back at the office. Just putting in my 10 hours, hopefully I won't have to stay over that day, and then just go home. That's always my goal. Put in my 10 hours, go home. But because of the nature of our work, obviously, and some of you have learned this already just by listening to these episodes, you never know what the day will bring. Some days are super straightforward. They're easy even. Other days, they just stay with you. This was definitely one of those days. And again, before I begin, I need to preface this with, I'm not a psychologist or a clinician or mental health clinician, and I don't claim to be. I can, however, research reputable sources. Even with preparation, I didn't realize how deeply the blatant neglect of animals would impact me, as I mentioned. So again, I'm not a clinician. I'm not a mental health expert. I'm not trying to diagnose anybody. I'm just going on my own perspective and the things that I have learned through the job and through my own efforts in learning more about situations like this. So if you want to learn more about the mental health aspect of this type of a scene, I encourage you to do that. So just putting that out there. But for me, maybe this, when it comes to this case, the severity of this case, or maybe it was just like, I care deeply about animals, except for horses. Don't come for me, horse lovers. I have a lot of trauma related to horses, and that's a whole nother conversation. So most other animals I have a love for, but horses. They're beautiful creatures, but I don't want anything to do with them. Just going to put that one out there too. So either way, nothing truly prepared me for this scene or this day, I guess I should say. And again, you don't really know what you don't know until you experience it, right? So from what I've learned, hoarding animals can be linked to a compulsive disorder. Failing to provide adequate care, nutrition, even shelter can be associated with complex conditions that may include obsessive compulsive disorder, personality disorders, paranoia, delusional thinking, attachment disorders, depression. I mean, the list goes on. Again, not a clinician, not an expert, just what I have learned through my training and my experience. So kind of setting up the scene, this was a residential home. It was a 2-story home. It's in a nice neighborhood. It was at one time a beautiful home, great family home. And I get on scene. I was dispatched to the residence. And again, it's the far northeast part of the city. Before my arrival, I read the case comments, and I almost always read case comments. So the case comments are what the dispatcher or 911 operator put into the call for service, so that the first responders, the paramedics, EMS, myself, anybody responding to the scene can read what is going on at the scene and why are we going out there. And so that could just better prepare us for our response, right? So for a crime scene, I would read those comments before I leave. And based on the comments in there, then I could determine, do I need extra equipment, extra packaging supplies? Is there something, I need to talk to my supervisor about? Maybe to just review policy or procedure, especially if it's something I've never gone to before, or I'm not quite sure, the steps necessarily to process something that I haven't done before. So that's not uncommon, like, hey, I'm going out to the scene, this is what I'm thinking. And so you just kind of toss ideas around and make sure that you're on the right path. So you don't get out there and you're just freeze up and you have no idea what you're supposed to be doing. And then, something unfortunate happens because you didn't collect something, you didn't document something, you didn't collect something. So it's just better to make sure that you are somewhat informed before you head out there. So obviously I'm reading the case comments on the case that I'm going out to. And it says the owner of the home had previously run an animal rescue, which is awesome, right? I can't imagine having to run or choosing to run a rescue facility for animals. It has to be overwhelming. It has to be expensive. So, just the fact that somebody took the initiative to try to help these animals says a lot about the person, right? So, and this is all allegedly, I'm just putting that out here too. Allegedly, there had been multiple complaints about the odors coming from the house, and city officials had been out to investigate it before, but nothing had been done prior as far as police enforcement or city enforcement. No city code violations to my knowledge or anything like that. So on this day, what unfolded was not just sad, it was horrific and really tragic when I look at the scene in its totality. And again, I wasn't really prepared for what I was about to see. So when I arrived, I spoke with the responding officer who tried to prepare me for what I was about to see. And interestingly enough, firefighters were also on scene, which I thought was odd. I didn't understand why they were there. As far as I knew, nobody was living in the home, and there was no fire or medical emergency, nothing like that. Nothing structurally that they needed to check either. So I wasn't really sure initially why the fire department was there, but they were on scene, again, which initially just kind of puzzled me. I wasn't sure what the heck was going on with them. But I learned that they had been called to check for the air quality in the home before we entered to make sure it was safe. So they go in with their full gear, their respirators, and they go in, redo meter readings of the quality of the air in the home before we go in there to decide, do I need a respirator? Should we be entering the home? That type of thing. So firefighters went in there, checked the quality of the air. They did clear the home, but they did recommend that we wear respirators just because of the quality of the air. It wasn't bad enough where we couldn't enter the home, but they recommended we wear respirators just for, our own health and safety, especially because you don't want to be breathing all those, any chemicals that are in there or decomposition or any of the particles that might be in the air or on the surfaces from the dead carcasses. So respirators, we decided to do respirators, at least I did, for the first trip inside. So I ended up entering through the front door. And so before I even do that, I've already met with my responding officer. I've gotten a briefing from him or her. They've told me what they know about the case, who the home belongs to, why we were called out there, what they saw when they went inside, all of that information. And that's information that I take down in my field notes so that I can use it to write my report when I'm done with my scene. So after I've gotten that part done, I do what I call a walkthrough. So I actually take my clipboard and my notes sheet and I go into the home and I walk around the home and I make my own observations. Of course, the officer came in there with me initially just to show me a few things that they saw that stood out to them and made sure that I had it documented. So I go into the home. I'm wearing booties. I'm wearing a bunny suit. So a bunny suit is like one of those white lab jumpsuits that zips up the front, and it just protects your clothing from anything. Of course, I'm wearing gloves and all that, and my respirator. And so we first walk in, and first of all, there's no air conditioning in the home, and it's warm. It's a warm day, sunny day. It's hot, and it does smell. But luckily, I did have my respirator on, so it did kind of hold the decomposition at bay a little bit. So we go inside and walk into the entryway, and that leads into like a living room, family room area, which leads into the kitchen and another big family room downstairs, and a big stairwell case that goes up to the left that goes all the way up to the second floor. But I'm in this house, I'm walking in, and I see that there's furniture, and they're like your couch and your tables and your coffee tables and your chairs and, your kitchen with your cabinets and all that. But there are literally, you can't really see the floor, and you can't, even the furniture, you would never want to sit on it or anything because it was just covered. Same thing with like the kitchen cabinets and the cupboards, just covered. So I'm walking into the house and I'm just documenting what I see, what I think is important, what I think is related to the call, why we're out there, what is pertinent information. So I'm writing what I'm seeing, what colors I'm seeing, if I'm seeing carcasses, what kind of animals, where they're located, is there air conditioning in the home, are there fans circulating, are there cages, what do those cages look like, is there fur, are there bones, are there live animals in there? I'm documenting all of that. So once I've taken enough notes that I feel like really sum up the scene, then I get my camera, which is a digital camera, and I start on the outside of the home because I want to photograph where I'm at. Because let's say we go to court for this, we want to be able to show the jury, the defense attorney, the prosecutor, the judge, anybody else present at the court, exactly where the scene occurred. Because remember, they're not there. So you have to show them, you have to educate them on where you're at and what does it look like. So we typically start on the outside of the home, and we really want to photograph the front of the house, the entire front of the house, the address of the house, and then depending on if there's anything on the sides of the home that's related to the incident, or something in the backyard, you'd also want to photograph that. And you want to make sure when you're taking your photographs that they're properly lit, which means you have enough light, that they have the right exposure, that they're not blurry or out of focus. If they are, you need to retake the photograph. So you're always checking your photographs after you take one to make sure it's actually documenting the scene accurately, right? And then, so once I'm done in the outside, and as long as there's not any evidence outside that I need to document, photograph, or mark for collection, then I go inside and I start photographing each room. So every room in the house has to be photographed. And so typically we do what we call 4 points in the room. But if the room is really big, then we will do more than 4 points. And typically those 4 points are the 4 corners of the room, where we stand at the corner and we photograph outward to the middle of the room and we show what the scene looks like. Many times I will have to take 3 different photographs, one that captures part of the ceiling, one that captures eye level, and then one that captures the floor. And I walk around the room counterclockwise, photographing at all 4 points. Now, if I have a lot of things I want to document in my photographs, or if it's a really big room, then I might even go from one corner to the middle of the wall and re-photograph there, and then go to the next corner, photograph, go to the middle of that wall, photograph, go to the next corner, photograph, and make my way around the room. And that's just to document what that actual physical room looks like. From there, after I've done that in every room in the house, including the bathrooms, the bedrooms, the closets, the pantries, the garage, everything, I actually have to go back inside each room and document pieces of evidence. And so I've talked before about the sequential order of how we take our photographs. So I've already done overall photographs, what we call overall photographs of the room. And basically the overall photographs show everything in that room. Then what I'm going to do is determine what pieces of evidence I need to document, what's related to the scene. And then I'm going to do what they call an evidence establishing photograph, or a mid-range photograph. So what that allows us to do is to orientate you in the crime scene room, in that room. So you can look at that mid-range photograph and you can determine exactly where it is in that room. And I do that by finding my evidence, right? Then I find a stationary object in the room, something that will not move, that is stationary, that will not change. So think about a wall, a door jamb, a counter, something like that, a pillar, something that will not move, obviously, unless you did some type of remodeling. And then what I do is I place myself between the evidence, the fixed object, and myself. And what my goal is to make a triangle, so that it has equal distance from me to the evidence and equal distance from me to the fixed object. And it will make a perfect triangle. And then I photograph that viewpoint. So if somebody's just looking at that photograph, they will be able to walk into that room, hopefully, and go right to the scene, or right to the spot where that evidence was. And then the next thing we're going to do is close-up photographs. So this photograph is going to be just of that piece of evidence, and it's going to really fill the frame of your camera. So there's not going to be a whole lot of room on either side, top or bottom of the photograph. And what we want to do is document the condition of the evidence. We want to document brand names. We want to document serial numbers, sizes. We want to document any defects or damage to that evidence, colors, all that. So that's the purpose of doing a close-up. And then we'll take that close-up photograph. So now I have an overall photograph of the room. I have a mid-range of the evidence with a fixed object, and I have a close-up photograph. Once I've done that with all the pieces of evidence, I could have 2 pieces of evidence in that room, or I could have 100 pieces of evidence. But I have to do the same thing for each piece of evidence. And then what I had to do is take an evidence marker, and I know you guys have seen those. They're yellow, orange, green, sometimes white, and they have numbers on them. I have to go through my entire scene and mark each piece of evidence with one of those evidence placards. And then I have to redo my photographs, my overalls, my mid-range, and my close-ups with that number. The reason why it's important that we have that number is because when we go to collect that item, if we do, we complete what they call an evidence collection log. It looks like a log, and we write down, let's say I use evidence number 1. I write 1, and then I write my initials so they know it's mine, and then I write a description of what that evidence is. So maybe it's a gun, and then the next item would be number 2, would be 2, my initials, and then pistol, revolver, shotgun, whatever it is. So that allows us to determine and identify what number that evidence is. And it's important if you have items of evidence that are exactly the same, like Coke cans or water bottles or beer bottles or things like that. You want to be able to differentiate between the different pieces of items, especially if they're similar or alike. And it just makes it easier also when you go to testify and they said, and they show you your evidence. Oh, did you collect item 1 and your initials, black Glock 9mm? Yes. So I know that that's mine. That's my piece of evidence that coincides with my photograph with the number 1 and so forth. So that's kind of how we keep track of how many pieces of evidence we collect at a scene, or at least document or process, and then who it belongs to by listing our initials, and then again, further identifying it by the description. So we have to do that with every crime scene that we go in and photograph, and there's evidence that we need to document and collect. So it's kind of a long process. Obviously, we wouldn't want to just go in there and snap a few photos, pick some things up, throw it in a bag, and call it a day. We don't work that way. It's very rare that you're going to see somebody skip the required steps from policy and procedure. I mean, there's only a few times I ever did that, and I had to have it documented and shown that I deviated from policy. And a couple times it was because of inclement weather. We're in the middle of a monsoon, and it just didn't make sense to walk through the whole process like that because I could lose evidence because of the weather. And one of the other times was because the sergeant said she could not guarantee my safety at a crime scene. So she said I had 30 seconds to do what I needed to do. And with that being said, I got out of my van. Anyway, took a few photographs, collected what I needed, and left. And then came back to the office and then rephotographed items and documented why I deviated from policy. So anyway, that's kind of how the photography works in crime scene, and then how we mark different pieces of evidence once we've determined that it's related, it's probative, and we need to document it. And there are times when we just photograph, but we don't collect. Like, we're not going to collect a couch, well, I shouldn't say we're not, but we don't typically collect couches. I have collected front doors before. I have collected dining room chairs before. So it's plausible, but highly unlikely. So in those situations, we would typically either cut out what we need if we can, or we would try our best to process it at the scene using the resources that we had. So yeah, the whole photography process, it's not uncommon for you to have hundreds of photos by the time you're done processing your crime scene. But that's okay, right? You want to make sure that you're documenting everything thoroughly because you don't want to miss something. Can't go back typically and redocument, rephotograph, or collect or process. So always photographing the outside, always photographing the address or a street sign or a business name, depending on where you're at. We're always going to 4-point the minimum each room that's related to the crime scene. We're always going to do mid-range and close-up of our evidence that we're collecting or documenting. And we're always going to do the same process once we have an evidence placard or marker down next to the evidence that we've identified that is probative to the crime scene. So lots of photography. So my recommendation is if you want to get into crime scene, even forensics, you should definitely take photography courses, because it's going to help you. That's something that I consistently took classes on in my career, so I could just get better and better and better. And every person I took a class from, I learned some new technique, a new way to document, to troubleshoot. So that would be my role. My suggestion is take some photography courses, learn about f-stops and shutter speeds and macro lenses and painting with light and work, photographing with a forensic light source, all those things. You'll thank me later. So now that we got off on that little tangent a little bit, so back to the scene here. So we entered through the front door. I was not prepared for what awaited me. No amount of training, no experience could prepare me for what I was about to see. The home, again, was large. It was 2 stories, and at one time someone had clearly lived there because, as I mentioned, there was furniture, household items were scattered throughout. But what made it different from any other home I'd seen before were the animals. Every step required vigilance. I'm not kidding you. Dead animal carcasses littered the floors. I mean, that really doesn't justify what it really looked like. Littered doesn't adequately describe it. But the floors, the couches, the countertops, even trash cans. There were trash cans, not the little 10-gallon trash cans. We're talking about dumpster trash cans that you use to dump your trash every week, and you take it out to the curb. Yes, those trash cans were filled with dead animals. I'm telling you what, the first one, I had no idea that was what was in there. And I'm like, this is weird. They have trash cans in the living room, big trash cans. Like, what the heck is in there? I thought, well, maybe they were in the process of moving. So at some point moving out. So maybe they were just using them to put items in there to move. Little did I know, when I lifted the lids, there were filled to the top, dead animal carcasses in there. I was like, what is going on? Like, what is even happening right now? Are you kidding me? Like, is this real? I literally had to take a step back because I did not even know how to process what I was seeing. Like, is this a horror movie? Is this a joke? Like, is this real? So literally dead animal carcasses littered the floors. Like I said, couches, countertops, the trash cans. That one threw me. That one was like, okay, I'm ready to throw in the white towel on this crime scene. I don't know about this. There were pens and cages contained more of the same. So those little black metal cages with dead animals in it, the little travel cages, dead animals in there. Literally dead bones, fur everywhere. You could not walk on the floor and not step on an animal of some sort. It blew my mind. So then we go upstairs. There's dead animal carcasses on the stairwell, and it's a large, long stairwell. I mean, there were stains everywhere on the walls and the floor. There was just debris everywhere. Animal remains covered. I'm telling you, every surface was covered. Bathrooms were no better. There was fur, there was feces, carcasses everywhere in the bathrooms, even in the bathtubs, underneath the counters, the vanities, and the sinks. Bedrooms, closets, and beds were equally horrifying. They were everywhere, on the beds, under the beds, in the closets, on the floor, weaved into the blankets. It was pretty horrifying, actually. As I moved through the house, I approached the scene as I would any crime scene, methodically and deliberately. Each item, each carcass, and each piece of debris had to be documented precisely. I photographed the rooms from, as I mentioned, multiple angles, the 4 points, but this room required me to do more than the 4 points. I had to do the 4 points plus midway in the wall because there was just so much to show. You couldn't grasp it unless I totally documented it completely with the photos. I had to ensure that the lighting captured details accurately, because you get in a dark room and you don't have enough lighting, then your photos are going to be underdeveloped, underexposed, and it's going to be hard to show how the scene really was when you show up in court. I used, rulers and scales and reference markers, like evidence markers, to provide a scale for critical evidence, and I just really focused meticulously on recording the location, the entire condition of the home, the number of carcasses to the best of my ability, the cages and the pens, the condition of them, the animals inside. Was there food? Was there water? Was there medication? all of that I had to document. Every note, sketching, every photo was crucial. So in forensic work, even what seems minor, like the position of a bowl or the placement of a blanket, can reveal patterns of neglect and intent in a situation like this. So did the animal have proper food? Did they have water? Were they able to access the water? Like, there were rabbits there, so did they have the right water containers? Did they have food? Did they have the right feed? I mean, all of these things are what we had to document, not just that it was present, but was there something not there? All these things were taken into consideration when photographing the scene. The smell, again, was overwhelming. Even with my respirator, I could feel, like, at this point, my emotions, especially with the trash can thing, I could just really feel my emotions welling up. And I was like, how could this happen? How could someone open their home to a rescue and then neglect these animals so completely? How could it go on for so long without accountability? Because clearly, based on the condition of the home, it had been going on for quite a while. And as I moved from room to room, I encountered more trash cans and I dreaded lifting the lids. It was just unbearable. At this point, I kind of had to take a step outside and I cried. Even though we're not supposed to cry and we're not supposed to show emotion, that's exactly what I did. And I took a few moments, let it all out, and then I gained my composure and I went back inside and finished the job. Again, just really dreading processing the rest of the scene. It was just unbearable. For a moment, I removed my respirator when I was outside. I pressed my hands to the wall and I just allowed myself to cry. Just a minute to release the sadness and shock. But of course, my job demanded composure. Emotions, just cannot overtake your thought process at a scene. You must, have to be able to document everything accurately and photograph meticulously, preserve the integrity of the evidence. So I had to get my what together and do the job. Each carcass, stain, or abandoned pen was evidence of negligence, even hazardous surfaces, decayed matter, slippery floors, mold had to be carefully navigated so nothing was disturbed. The garage was worse. It was literally stacked to the ceiling, side to side, front to back, up and down. Stacked to the ceiling with cages, pens, boxes. It reeked of death and decay. More dead animals, dogs, cats, rabbits, birds, snakes. I approached it as I would any forensic scene, again, making sure I'm photographing completely, noting the condition of every animal pen, recording the sequence in which I found the items, marked areas for follow-up investigation because I knew they were going to be going back into the home, carefully noting any potential biohazards, and ensured that nothing was moved until photographed and logged. And my responsibility for this scene was to capture every piece of evidence so investigators and prosecutors could see the full extent of the neglect. I didn't collect anything from the scene. Everything stayed as is, and then the county came in, the health department, and the animal control came in afterwards. Afterward, I learned that some of the animals had survived because they had gone back the next day and found some rabbits alive in the garage. So they survived, and again, those rabbits were alive in the garage. Animal control had removed cages and boxes, rescuing a few before I got there, I guess. And I remember removing my protective covers, disgusted by the debris and the hair and the waste clinging to me. The stench of the scene kind of lingered on my clothes, my skin and hair, and I was pretty angry. And I just was like, this is just totally unacceptable. Even if the person had the best intention, the fact that it got to this point is just unacceptable. Recognizing at that point my own emotional state. And I've had a few years on, and I've learned that nobody's going to take care of you except for you. So after I cleared my scene, did all my photographs, took all my notes, felt good about where I left off, I called my supervisor and I said, I'm not coming into work tomorrow. I'm taking a mental health day. And again, in this line of work, if you don't advocate for yourself, no one else will. I knew I needed to care for myself to continue doing this kind of work for those who, depended on me as the crime scene investigator. I don't recall the exact outcome of the case. I believe the owner pled guilty, but the penalties for such neglect are often very minor, and I'm not even sure it made meaningful impact. But the scene left a mark on me. I only wish we had been notified sooner so more animals could have been rescued. So that was, like I said, a pretty disturbing animal abuse case. And I've dealt with other animal abuse cases where people have abused their pets for whatever reason. Teenagers have abused their pets, or when somebody's going through a breakup, believe it or not, one partner will kill the other pet, will kill the pet to get back at their partner. So I have been in those situations, but this is the first time I've ever been in a scene like this where there were hundreds of dead animals just everywhere piled up. It was just very impactful. And I was really thankful that after that scene, I never had another scene like that. So very, very thankful for that. So hopefully you learned something new today. I never had to go to court on that case. I know she pled guilty, so there was no trial. I don't know what happened to that house, but honestly, I feel like that house needed to be condemned and bulldozed down, because I can't imagine cleaning that house up and then having to sell it and somebody buying it. So I'm not sure whatever happened to the house. Unfortunately, it was a beautiful home before all that happened. So, but yeah, that scene definitely stayed with me, and I'm just grateful that I never had to see something like that again, because it was pretty gross, pretty devastating, very tragic, all those poor animals, just very, very sad. So the next episode won't be near as emotional. We're going to talk the next episode about looking for work in crime scene investigation and forensics, how that looks, what you should do, what kind of websites you should go to, what you can expect for your interview process, talk a little bit about your education, your training, things like that. So it'll be a really light episode before we hit the holidays. And then I will be taking the month of December off, so there will be no episodes for December, and then we'll reconvene in January, probably mid-January. So in 2 weeks, we'll have our episode 9, and we'll, like I said, talk about getting a job in crime scene investigation and what that looks like. So hopefully you guys will tune in for that as well. And if you know somebody looking for work in that profession, definitely have them tune in so they can get some insight as far as how to apply for work, where to look, what they're typically looking for when they're hiring. But thanks again for tuning in behind the yellow tape with me, stepping behind that yellow tape, getting a personal look at what we process, what we, work as far as crime scene investigations. It's not all homicides and kidnappings. It's, burglaries and animal abuse and neglect. It's a little bit of everything. So the best way you can support the show is by leaving a quick rating or review. It helps more people find us, and it helps me continue bringing you more cases straight from the crime scene. Make sure to hit the follow so you don't miss an episode. Until then, stay curious, and I'll see you on the next Behind the Yellow Tape. Thanks for tuning in.